Welcome, everyone. My name is Jeremy Katz, and I'm the Senior Director of Archives at the William Breman Jewish Heritage Museum in Midtown Atlanta. Thank you so much for your interest in the Atlanta Jewish History Talk series, presented by the Breman Museum in partnership with the Southern Jewish Historical Society and generously sponsored by Marilyn Ginsberg Eckstein. Over the course of the series, we are going to be discussing Atlanta's Jewish history in depth with scholars in their respective topics. Now, we developed this series to promote a new book written by yours truly. Uh, is The History of Jewish Atlanta. It's for sale at wherever books are sold. It features 200 images that document the rich history of our community. And the vast majority of the images from the book come from the archives at the Bremen Museum. And all authors' royalties are going to benefit the museum's operation. In the follow-up email that I'm going to be sending all participants, there will be a link where you can purchase the book, as well as Jeff's book about Rich's department store. We'll provide a link to that as well. Now, without further delay, it is my pleasure to welcome the executive director of the Bremen Museum, Leslie Gordon, who will introduce our speakers for today.
I'm pleased to introduce Jeff Clemmons. Although born in Mobile, Alabama, Jeff considers himself an Atlantan, having lived in the metropolitan area for more than 30 years. His family has an even older connection to the city, with his great-great-grandfather, Archibald Clemmons, fighting in the Atlanta campaign, including the Battle of Atlanta during the American Civil War. His current full-time employer is a large electric utility where he works in the corporate communication department. Outside of his day-to-day job, he gives walking tours of the Midtown and SoNo districts and Westview Cemetery of Atlanta for the Atlanta Preservation Center. Clemmons has written 2 books, Riches, a Southern Institution, and Atlanta's Historic Westview Cemetery. He's also responsible for getting Westview Cemetery listed in the National Register of Historic Places. In 2020, Clemmons, along with 3 others, was nominated for an Emmy Award for producing Georgia Public Television's Riches Remembered. Tom Asher is currently president of the Rich Foundation Incorporated, a private Atlanta foundation established in 1943 by Rich's department store that supports a wide range of community activities with a focus on education and social justice. After 48 years in the investment industry, Tom led a design team at Georgia Tech's Scheller College of Business that created a permanent 35-yard timeline of the history of Wall Street from 1789 to the present. Tom is married to Spring Asher, an award-winning TV producer and author. They have 3 children and 8 grandchildren. Welcome.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Leslie, and welcome to everybody. It's a pleasure to introduce Jeff Clemmons to you this morning. Jeff is not only an historian, but he's also a very talented and accomplished writer. As a matter of fact, in 2012, when the book came out, the book was published, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution greeted it with a wonderful review and also a banner headline. The banner headline said, it was on the living section, "Riches was the soul of the city." There you go, soul of the city. Author documents department store that was at the center of Atlanta's history and holidays for generations. So, Jeff, it's been 45 years since the store was sold. The name's been long gone. So my first question would be, why now? What motivates you to write the book?
I'll try to be concise. I was joking with everybody before we got on. You got to reel me in if I get going too long and get to talking. With Riches, when it came about, to be quite honest, I had zero desire to write a book about riches. It wasn't on my radar. It was not anything that I was remotely even thinking about doing. The way it sort of came about is I had started to give tours for the Atlanta Preservation Center and was doing Midtown tours and the Midtown SoNo commercial district. And as a result of that, I wanted to, sort of document research that I found. And it does no good, if I'm hit by a bus and all that research is in my head, no one else can access it. I didn't think that was maybe the best outcome. So what I decided to do was to join Wikipedia and start writing Wikipedia articles and or editing them. With Wikipedia, people sort of roll their eyes sometimes. They can get hijacked for a day or 2, but they're pretty good about keeping things at least documented the way newspapers have written it. Of course, we all know that newspapers aren't always 100% accurate, but I started doing that, and there is a way that you sign up on the back end that people can contact you if they so choose to find you out that way. And I'd been to Tampa, and I was at a friend's house, probably had way too many drinks to drink down in Tampa, and decided for some reason to check my spam mailbox, which I never do. And there was an email from who would become my publisher at the time, asking me if I wanted to write a book on riches. And, I sort of waited till the next day, and I was clear-headed and sort of responded, "Yeah, maybe, but let me think about it." So I came back to Atlanta, and I basically told them, I don't know that I'm the right person for the riches book, but I do have this other book that I want to do. And they said, "Okay, great, go ahead, send in a timeline." So I spent a couple of weeks writing a 12-page outline, very detailed, and sent that to the publisher. They sent it back and said, "Yeah, this is great, but can you do a timeline for riches?" So I was working at a itty bitty law firm, Troutman Sanders, at the time, and took my lunch break and cobbled together a timeline for riches really quickly, sent that into the publisher, and they said, "Yeah, this is great. Let's do that." So I relented. Regardless of what some authors will tell you, and I feel weird even saying I'm an author, but there's a bit of vanity in it too. I'll be quite honest with you. I wanted my name on the spine of a book. I mean, it was always something I wanted to do, but I saw myself as the great next Southern novelist, not a historian by any stretch of the imagination. But long story short, I was asked to do the book. Originally, it was supposed to be done in 8 months with a full-time job that was killing me. One of the reasons I didn't want to do riches is because I was afraid. I didn't know what I was going to say. What the hell did they do besides sell clothes? I mean, that's how naive I was about the whole situation. Needless to say, I went in and started to do research and realized how unbelievably wrong I was about riches, and asked for a year extension on the book, which still nearly killed me to do the research. But I really found out that riches was the heart and soul and the cultural temple, if you will, of the city of Atlanta. I mean, its tentacles go deep and wide and long. So that's sort of how I came to it. And just to give you an idea of the amount of research that I have, I had over 1,000 typed pages that I had to whittle down to 224 pages. So there was a lot that was left out in the final book, but riches was massive. So that's the short answer to how I got to it and writing the book.
Jeff, how'd you do your research? And I mean, how do you go about digging something out that's that old? And I guess secondly, were there any real surprises along the way?
There are always surprises. As far as the research is concerned, I am meticulous to the point of maddening at times. I think with my research, because of my legal background and all, I don't take things at face value. So if you tell me something, I'm going to go double check and make sure that it's accurate. But what I do is I'm a researcher by heart. So I go out and research as much as I can. And then I come home, I take handwritten notes wherever I'm at, and I bring them home. I retype them and then put them in all these different folders. Then I take those and plot them into a big timeline. And so with riches, I think my timeline was 400 and something pages of a timeline, and then I use that to whittle down to the book text. But I just go and research and find as much as I can. There were lots of surprise. One of those was I knew how Morris Rich, the founder, had passed away. Subsequent generations, I knew how Walter Rich had passed away and all these others, but I didn't know there was no mention of Emanuel Rich, one of the original 3 brothers. And I thought that was a little odd, and they just stopped talking about him in 1897. Upon doing research, I finally found out that he had committed suicide and stabbed himself 33 times with a fruit knife. So that was certainly surprising. But what also was surprising was just how intricate, how enmeshed riches was in riches. But my research method is all over the place. So nothing's off limits. And I always say to myself, if there's a pile of trash or something on the floor and I don't think it's worth looking at, I always know to look at it. And that's when I usually find a lot of very interesting stuff. So that's my method. I research and talk to people. One thing that's different about me than other historian researchers is I don't put a lot of quotes in my book. And if you'll notice, I don't know that I have but one quote in the whole book. And that's because a lot of times I feel like quotes are remembrances rather than actual narratives or what was said during the time. So I feel like they've been sort of shifted and sifted through time and memory in the rose-colored glasses. So I like to try to keep those out if I can.
Well, you did. I know it's obvious and exhaustive job to go back 100 and whatever years, well over a century, and dig out the history. But Riches did something that was really rather remarkable in terms of the longevity. It lasted for 109 years. And McKinsey has done a study going back a couple of years that looked at the Standard & Poor 500 stock index. And of the 500 stocks in the index over history, the average lifespan was 60 years, 61 years, I think, to be accurate. And now it's down, I think it's down to something like 18. So how did Riches really last so long?
There are a lot of things, I think, that made Riches last so long. You know, all these years later, so 2005 was the last year that Riches was around. And for me, what is that? My math is horrible. What, 20 years later, a little over 20 years later? No, anyway, math is not my strong point, but still be talking about it. And to still, I mean, I've done 80 something of these talks over the last 9 years, and there's been radio and television shows about Riches, and one of them was just nominated for an Emmy. The first one done in 2012 won an Emmy. It's amazing to me that this store, the institution, still evokes the kind of reaction that it gets, and I attribute that to a lot of different things. But before I get into those, I think Morris Rich really set the tone for Riches and for what it should be. You know, he really sort of believed that if you give to the community gives back to you. Like, you pay it forward in a sense, and it multiplies tenfold. And Morris operated with that, you know, and that's some of the things that he did. He had great customer service, great marketing. He was a great steward for the community. And very quickly, when he opened, I mean, we're talking 1867. We're still in Reconstruction era Georgia after the Civil War. A lot of people don't have money. And Morris opens a store, which by all intents and purposes probably should not have survived. He wasn't unique in his store. There were many, many other stores that had opened during that time. But one of the unique things that he did, and people don't realize, is a lot of dry goods stores were cash only businesses. And what Morris did is he came in, he realized that the people in the communities didn't have cash. So he let them pay with poultry or corn, or pay when their crops came in and made money on them. So I think that really set him up, that sort of mentality to help the community out and that they would help him. And I think that that's really what did it. But then again, that incredible customer service, that creative marketing, all of that plays into it. But I think Morris set the tone, and it continued on. And then, of course, was just multiplied over the years by Walter and Dick Rich and the Rich family. And they became stalwarts and institutions and pillars of the community.
That's a good answer. I mean, that really leads us to the people, the management, who I guess in today's jargon, we'd say they were disruptors in a certain extent, because they were entrepreneurs, they were game changers. And maybe the most famous thing that people remember is the return policy, where you could take anything back at any time and get your money back. It's still not uniformly received in the retail industry. In fact, in 1976, that was the year that, of course, they sold the business to Federated Department Stores. The Federated Department Stores annual report actually had a full page devoted to not just the acquisition of Riches, but just to their return policy. And in fact, they reproduced a song, which you can see there on the screen. You may not be able to read it, but the song is really, I won't just give you one brief overview of it. It's about a lady who disliked her husband. And it was written in 1960 for a comedy routine. And it was, she disliked her husband. So she said in the song, "I took him back to Riches. They'll take anything back, you know. They said they couldn't recall selling him, but they must have if I said so." Well, I won't read any more, but we'll be glad to send you a copy if you can't read it there. But Jeff, talk about some of the really innovative things they did over the years to help make this the great company that it was, and the customer loyalty.
There's so many I'm going to forget, and I could take hours to talk about all of them. Certainly, as you mentioned, the return policy, of all the things I hear about, besides perhaps the great tree and the pink pig and the coconut cake, is the return policy. And the stories that I've heard about the things that they would take back, I mean, you could fill a gymnasium 10 times over with returned used pantyhose and stockings. There were stories of people coming in and literally taking things off the shelf and going up to the counter and returning it to get money for it. Sibley wrote in her book about this woman that was overheard in the store with her daughter shopping for a dining room table. She'd just gotten married, and the store clerk overheard the mother saying that she never liked the one she originally got in 12, 13 years before. And the next day, Riches showed up and replaced it free of charge with the one she had liked in the store and took the other one back. And I get people that ask me, they're like, did Riches really take things back? And the answer was yes. But Morris and Walter and Frank Neely and Dick Rich, they all knew. They weren't stupid. They knew people were going to take advantage of the policy. They knew that there are bad apples out there, but they also knew that on the flip side or converse side of that there are honest people out there, and that there are reasons why you should take things back. Basically, their philosophy was make it right. That was really Frank Neely who came along and said, the customer's adjustment, give them what they want, make sure that they get what they want. So it was those attention to details, and there's all kind of stories about Riches would alter paintings. There was one about the famous painting of Christ, and a customer wanted him to have blue eyes instead of brown eyes, and so Riches took it back and made his eyes blue, and they were just all these little things that they did. But outside of the return policy, they opened up a credit union for their employees. They had a nursery for customers to drop their kids off. They had credit cards. They were the first to have credit cards. There were just so many. They were first to have a plate glass window, which was innovative. And many people think, are you serious? That was innovative? But you think about 1867 up until the 1880s, the windows weren't plate glass windows. They were the typical mutton sash windows that you would see in stores. So it sort of hindered the view. And Riches was one of the first ones to install those plate glass windows. And Lucian York, who is buried out at Westview Cemetery next to Walter Rich, was really innovative in the way that he designed those windows to entice people in to come see the merchandise. And before I forget to say this, and it comes up with the Pink Pig and the Great Tree and a lot of the other services, is that Riches in a way was Disney World before Disney World. It was the culture of the town. It's pre-radio, pre-television, pre-internet, certainly. And you're going from a carriage, horse and buggy trade to the internet. So Riches encompassed a wide swath of innovative ideas, and they had to keep up with the times. So they did so many different things that endeared them not only to customers, but to the employees as well. The employee lounges that were on top of the store with shuffleboard and all these amazing things for employees to enjoy, the employee lounges and cafeterias. Some of the stuff was sort of unheard of at the time. And so it's those things that were innovative, and it goes on and on. I could talk forever, but.
Tell a little about Penelope Penn, if you would. That's pretty unique. And some of the stories in your book are terrific.
Penelope Penn was amazing, or unique to me. What people don't realize, though, is that the retailers, the dry goods, and later became the department store families, a lot of them knew each other. So it was a small community in the sense that the Atlanta owners were talking to people in New York and Detroit and all these other places. So a lot of the things pre-internet, television, radio, those things are, or after, but without the proliferation of information on the internet, they shared ideas. So like the Pink Pig, while the Pink Pig is unique to Riches, that ride was not unique to department stores. And Penelope Penn, I lost my train of thought. Penelope Penn was also an idea that was adopted from another department store. And what it was originally started off as three women that were from the junior league, and they were hired on at Riches to come and sort of be personal shoppers for people. So women could come in and ask for their expertise and have them help pick out everything from dresses to china. But Riches turned it up a notch, and it's astonishing. Penelope Penn, at one point, they had files at Riches that had individuals' birthdays, anniversaries, their husbands' birthdays, you name it, on a file card. And yes, it's a little sexist and it goes back to the 1940s and 50s, but it was a time that existed, and the housewife a lot of times would call Riches and say, hey, today's my anniversary. Could you pick something off the shelf, wrap it, and then deliver it to my husband's office? and they would do that. So the housewife would call from Buckhead down to the store, Penelope Penner would go get the item, take it off the shelf, make sure it was okay, wrap it, and then have that hand delivered to the husband at his office. I mean, that kind of customer service does not exist anymore. And it was remarkable. Penelope Penn was used when there was a fire down the street. Instead of calling the fire department, they would call Rich's Penelope Penn department and have them call the fire department. Or they would book trips on, steamer or on ships or trains. They did it. And Penelope Penn was phenomenal for that service. And it lasted for quite a while. Unfortunately, in the end, it became a rebate department. So this great service, long after the Federated merger, became a rebate department where you send in checks. So it certainly did not last, but in its heyday, it was an incredible service. And all those kind of things were unique. I mean, Rich's had a library. I mean, a lending library. You went to Rich's in the 1920s and you took out a book like you would at the library. And there are stories of people having that hardbound. And if anybody has a copy of this book, call me, email me. I'd love to get a copy. I've never seen one, but they were supposedly hardbound green books that they took, and they were all across the Eastern Seaboard, taking them on train trips to New York, reading these books from Rich's library. So you're a department store, you're a library, you're all of these things. So it's really, truly phenomenal.
It's interesting. I mean, none of those things, and there are dozens more that you could talk about. None of them are done today, really. I remember back in the mid 60s, I saw a research report of all the publicly traded department stores, and Rich's was, of course, publicly traded stock. And Rich's had the highest percentage of returns of any store in the country, of the sales. Percentage was shrinkage or whatever they called it technically, but it was basically return merchandise. However, they also had the highest profit margin, which just validates what Frank Neely was talking about. So that really talks about management is always the difference in a business, success or failure. Talk a little about the leaders, if you would, the people, the key people, some of whom you mentioned briefly.
So there, and feel free to interrupt and correct me if I get something wrong. There were remarkable leadership from the get-go. I mean, Morris, Rich, originally Morris Reich, for those that don't know, the last name was anglicized, just like Haverty's Furniture, which started at Rich's, by the way, total aside, but Haverty's were Irish. Their name was actually O'Haverty, and they dropped the O, so it wasn't uncommon at that time period to do those kind of things. But the leaders at Rich's, I mean, you certainly start off with Morris and the three brothers, Morris, Daniel, and Emmanuel. The two who joined in later came in, and they were instrumental. I mean, this was not only a place for them to work, it was their legacy, it was their store. And then after Morris Rich stepped down from the presidency, his nephew took over. Daniel's son, Walter Rich took over, and Walter continued the legacy. Walter did a lot of innovative things. My favorite story about Walter, if you can believe this, was that he actually had farm property up near Ansley Forest in Atlanta, where you could see him spotted in his overalls plowing a garden on his plot. So I always thought that was sort of interesting, that here's this huge businessman and then he's going home and working in overalls and a straw hat. But Walter, another thing that Walter really did, and they were all of them involved in many numerous boards throughout the city and very influential in social and political circles. I always say that there was a political structure in Atlanta, and it sometimes shifted, but it was city government, Coca-Cola, and Rich's. And then sometimes, depending upon events, those three could interchange. But Walter Rich, one thing that he does not get enough credit for, which is still lasting to this day, which is the picture you see in the bottom right-hand corner, and he started the Dogwood Festival. So it was Walter Rich who started that creation to sort of celebrate the spring that came in. And a lot of people don't realize the Atlanta Botanical Gardens and all of that started at Rich's too, originally as a group of individuals at the downtown store that were there for almost 40 something years, and then left that and then went and sort of did the Atlanta Botanical Garden. And then you have other people, Frank Neely, who's on the left, was the only president when it was family run that was not a family member. But the Rich family reached out to Frank Neely for his expertise with the Schlesinger Candy Factory, and he had gone and worked at Westinghouse. And so he had really honed in on manufacturing and the way to market things and sort of really make it what you would think of almost, it's not a good analogy, but almost like Ford way of running things. And so Neely came and, and no disrespect to the Rich family that was running it, but Frank Neely really made the store the powerhouse that it was going into the 40s, 50s, and 60s. And it was sort of his innovations. He was very involved in the community. He helped bring down Fulton Bag. Thank you, whoever did that. He did come from Fulton Bag. He was instrumental in bringing Lockheed Martin here. There was, until it was destroyed at Georgia Tech, there was a nuclear reactor named after him. So he was very involved as well. Of course, the person that most people are going to remember, and rightfully so, is the gentleman at the top right. And that is the incredible Dick Rich. And shout out to Dick Rich's niece, Rosalind, who I think is on the call. Wonderful person, Rosalind. I love you to death. It's great conversations. But talking about Dick and his contributions, and he's what everybody remembers of Dick Rich. Most people that remember the store, most of us that are still around anyway, remember Dick Rich. And whether that was him riding in his car from Buckhead down to the store, or being at events, or at the store, or starting what became the Woodruff Arts Center, or many of these are being on the MARTA board and really being instrumental in getting MARTA started. But I will tell you what most people remember about Morris, and it is a motto that I will hopefully carry forward if I ever run a business or store, is that to this day, I get people that come and talk to me when I do these talks. And what they remember most about Dick is that he came and spoke to them. He walked the floors, he came out of his office, and he conversed with the people, and he was really good at remembering people's names. But what touched most people is that here's a guy running a company, an institution in the city of Atlanta, and he has taken enough time out of his day to come down and shake hands with people and talk with them. So there are many others that I haven't mentioned, and it goes on, and it goes down many different levels of leadership. But those were the stalwarts, if you will, that ran it.
Just a comment about Dick Rich, that he came in after World War II and became the CEO in 49, and then really was the CEO for almost 30 years until he died. And he and those were the boom years. You can't attribute all of the growth to him personally, but the fact that he would talk to people on the selling floor, the customers, they remember that, and the employees remember that. And you can imagine how many people told other people that of their experience. But they were also great marketers and innovators as well. They had a reputation as a store, not just in Atlanta and Georgia, but nationally for some of the things they did. What do you think people miss the most about Rich's, and maybe some of the things that they did to bring customers in the business?
Before I answer that, I do want to shout out to your dad, Tom. Your dad was instrumental as well at Rich's, certainly with the the credit department and all of that, and some phenomenal stories that you and your brother Norman have told over the years. But your dad was certainly instrumental in that as well. So a shout out to him. And now saying that, I completely forgot your question.
I was really thinking about just purely marketing concepts that, but things that, and particularly the things that they miss, that people miss today. What do you think the biggest things they miss? They still talk about.
There are many. Undoubtedly, the ones you always get are what you see on the screen: the great tree and the pink pig. And I always to joke with people too, is what I loved about the Rich family and all is they were savvy. Look, it's a business. Like, it is marketing. It is, you want to be a steward to the community, but you also have to know how to run a business, and have to know how to market your customers. And what I love is that the Rich family, it was a Jewish family, a Jewish institution. And here they are in Atlanta with a huge Christmas tree and flying bacon over the toy department. And I love that because and it was very smart. And it wasn't, it's no disrespect to anybody's religious beliefs or anything like that. But in retail, you know that October to December, you're making more money in those 3 months that you're going to make the rest of the year. So you better go after that market, and you better know how to bring people into the store. And I said it earlier, it's pre-Disney World, it's pre all these rides. So Rich is very smartly, and look, they thought these were good ideas, but they had no idea they were going to become cultural touchstones. The Pink Pig, it wasn't originally the Pink Pig. And when they originally put it up, they didn't know it was going to work. They were kind of hesitant about it until it made I think it was a dime and a quarter, I forget, but they made $9,000 the first year they put it up, the first season. That was a lot of money in 1956. The Great Tree too. I mean, Palota, who came up with that idea, they never anticipated what it became. And it's on the cover of Time magazine. It's in movies. There are movies out there with it, and it was phenomenal to block off the streets at night, and then successively light up the levels on the bridge, and then eventually on Oh Holy Night light up this ginormous Christmas tree. I mean, it was truly brilliant marketing. But those are what people miss. People always tell me they miss the coconut cake. That's a close second. If I had to do in those orders, it's Pink Pig, the Great Tree, and Pink Pig, coconut cake, and the Great Tree. I always love to tell people great until I tell them how many calories are in a piece of coconut cake, and they don't think it's so great after that. It's over it. It's pretty cool. But there were so many other things. There was the economy basement. There were the hotels, Fashionata, the Lovett Show. The list is endless. I mean, the art school in Florence, Italy, to create a replica of the only replica that I know of, full-size replica of Michelangelo's David, and had it put on top of the store. And there's a great story about that and what happened to it, which I can go into later. But it was endless. Wedding department, college board, Secret Santa shop. The list is endless, and I could spend hours talking about them. But those are a few, Tom, that people miss. And I'll never forget one of the first talks I did in Decatur. There was a woman, she was over 100 years old in a wheelchair. And I started talking about riches, and I usually open up because that's when you really get into the meat of it, talk about what people want to talk about. And she chair and was so excited to be talking about riches. She's like a little kid again. It was amazing to see.
You mentioned that marketing course brought them into the store. They did a lot of fashion goods. It was the fashion leader in the area, and who put them on the map but Saul Kent. And he was the fashion director. Take a minute just to talk a little about him, because he was important in the success of the business.
Saul was fantastic. I did not get to meet Saul. I did get to know Irene Kent, and love Irene. If she's listening, hello. I don't know if she's on or not, but I remember when I went and interviewed her, two things stood out. I was supposed to be interviewing her. She gave me a lot of wine, and she ended up interviewing me at her home. And I love the fact that she considered Atlanta still the provincial southern town. That she was originally from New York. But Irene was fantastic. Saul's family's fantastic. But Saul came from Columbus, Georgia. He had worked at Clemmons down there, and he came to Atlanta and sort of ran the fashion department, if you will, in Atlanta, and started what most people remember him by as Fashionata, which was this unbelievable, extravagant Broadway-styled show that was at many places over the years, but ended up at the Fox Theater for most of its run. And he was just, he always said, be divine. And the people that used to be his models they fondly talk about him. And I met a group of them for a talk once and talked to them. And he was an incredible person. He was an innovator, forward thinking. And, Fashionata was sort of his thing. What I'd love to know, though, is that Fashionata was actually an idea he borrowed from Francis Breman, who had been at Rich's a few years before, and 9 years after Fashionata had disappeared, he resurrected it. And then he morphed that into, it became the Lovett Show, and for the Lovett School, and the list of people, it was Rich's here in Atlanta, but he knew all the big designers across the world. He knew so many of them. And, he, for the Lovett School, which is a private school here in Atlanta, he brought in Princess Stephanie, Grace Kelly's daughter, to premiere her swim line at the Lovett School in the 80s before he went to Harrods in London. So he had some pull. He was a phenomenal leader and great forward thinker and just an incredible person.
Thank you. One other item that in the marketing is before there was an Amazon for books, there was a Riches for books. And Riches was clearly the biggest bookseller in the South. And the genius behind that was the amazing Faith Brunson, who was the buyer. They had autographs for Bob Hope and Milton Berle and Lauren Bacall and Hank Aaron. You can go down the list of famous Atlantans who were there. But that publicity didn't just happen by accident. It went out because of the leader of the public relations, which was Ann Berg for several decades. And I know you met Ann. I didn't want to go in without, at least we don't want to end without talking about Ann Berg.
No, Ann Burr. And if any of you knew her, she was something else. She was, and I say this in all respect, I have the utmost respect for Ann, and God rest her soul. She was an amazing person, and she had a tough job. She's doing PR, and she did it. The first time I met her, she's the first person I actually reached out to when I started researching the book. I'll never forget trying to ask her where she was at. She was downtown at the Rich Foundation, and she told me she was the third or fourth building on the right past Piedmont, and I was like, okay, I don't know where that's at. And then she said, son, how long have you lived in Atlanta? And at that time it was over 20 something years. And she said, well, it's high time you learned Buckhead. And she hung up. She wasn't mean. That was just Ann. She was just a spitfire. And she was protective, and rightfully so, of Riches. I mean, here comes this little boy that's going to write a book on Riches. She had no idea what it's going to do. And so I love her for being that. I met her the first time with wonderful conversation. And I'll never forget, she kept talking to me about Walter Rich sitting out in the car. Well, at the time, I hadn't done all my research. I just started, and it kept going in my head. I'm like, Walter Rich, wait a minute, wasn't he president way back? I said, he must be in his 90s or 100, and he's been sitting out in this car for an hour. Only to find out when she took me out there to meet him that it was a portrait that had come from this, I believe at the time it was the Standard Club, that they were getting rid of his portrait and giving it to the Rich Foundation. But she had an incredible sense of humor, but she was, she was a gatekeeper. I knew if I didn't get through Ann, I didn't get on Ann's good side, I wasn't going anywhere. But she was a wonderful, wonderful person. And I owe her much gratitude. That's one of the reasons why the book is dedicated to her, as well as you, Tom, and your brother. So
Dick Rich was there for the good times and the bad, and everything wasn't all perfect. And there were some implications, problems that had national implications. And I think it's important that we not, particularly Black History Month, that we not overlook the sit-ins of 1960. Tell us what happened there.
We don't have enough time. It's a very long, it's a long story. I'll give you the short version. It's a touchy subject. We all do this with our histories and our time, is that over time, we filter out the bad and we remember only the good, or we remember things through rose-colored glasses. This is not a discredit towards Riches. I mean, a phenomenal institution, but they had growing pains at times as well. One thing that doesn't ever really get talked about is Riches' foray. Their first store outside of Atlanta was in Knoxville, Tennessee. And it actually was a failure. I mean, it just wasn't the same. It didn't work out. So they had some business things that didn't work out. But Riches in the 1960s was no different than other institutions across the city and across. In 1960, it was the presidential election with Nixon and JFK. And what had happened is that at the time, Riches had bathrooms and restaurants for Blacks that were in the basement or not in the area. So Riches, as a Black person, and buy a $5,000 coat, weren't allowed to go into the restaurants or the bathrooms. And so there was a groundswell after the 1960s movement where the my brain just went blank on the Greensboro, North Carolina, that's the store they went into. Anyway, they started basically sit-ins, and Riches got caught up in those sit-in movements as well. Started in Knoxville, then came to Atlanta, and Lonnie King, who I got to know, phenomenal individual, unbelievably intelligent. You can see him there over Martin Luther King's thank you Woolworths in North Carolina. And Lonnie King, who you see over Martin Luther King's shoulder in the picture on the right, they're not related. Very smartly thought, if we go after Riches, it's the largest institution in the city. If we can get Riches to allow or to desegregate, the rest of the city will follow. And so they very smartly went into the campaign. It gets very convoluted, but Martin Luther King was arrested in October at Riches. You see there in the picture, spent his first night in jail as a result of Riches and the protest. And then he was subsequently, all the students and all were let go by Dick Rich. But Martin Luther King was held on a previous charge from Oscar Mitchell, a DeKalb County judge, and was ultimately sentenced to a year hard labor in Reedsville prison, state prison, which was ultimately overturned, but that brought in the Kennedy campaign. Long story short, Nixon did not respond. Nixon, because of the governor at the time, Ivan Allen, if I'm getting that right, I always get him and Hartsfield confused, but basically told a lie. It leaked out to the press. It put JFK on the spot, and JFK had to publicly comment about the events that were happening at Riches. And that ultimately turned the tide of the election. And once Martin Luther King Jr. was sprung from Reedsville State Prison, JFK's campaign smartly said, you know what, let's take advantage of this. And they put out what you see on the left, which is the blue bomb, what they called the blue bomb. And it went out to churches, to Black churches across the country. And Black people showed up in record numbers to vote. And JFK won the Electoral College by 84 electoral votes, I believe it was, and won the election. So while it's a painful memory for many at Riches, it's also a phenomenal event at Riches, because you can truly say that Riches, I always say it's the butterfly effect. If the events had not happened at Riches in 1960, JFK would not have been the 35th president of the United States. There would have been no Camelot, no Marilyn Monroe singing happy birthday. So when you think about it in those contexts, it was a huge deal. It changed national politics. Riches then did desegregate in 1961 as a result of all of this, when the school system in Atlanta desegregated as well. But phenomenal, interesting time in our history, sad time in our history for a lot of different reasons. But you could spend several hours talking about all of this. But that's it in a nutshell as to what had happened.
One last question, and that is that one of the keys to Rich's success really started with Morris, as you started the conversation this morning, talking about Morris and his philosophy that if you take care of the community will take care of you. Talk a little about that whole philosophy and how it impacted and hopefully continues to impact our city.
Morris did, and there's a Jewish term for it I can't pronounce and I always forget it, but it's basically giving. What is it again, Tom? I'm sorry.
Well, it could be tikkun olam.
I think that's it. I'm horrible with that. But what it was is it basically set up a mindset to give back to the community, and Riches did that time and time again. When the cotton market fell, first of World War, right around World War I, Riches, what did they do? They went out and bought the cotton in all the warehouses to help the farmers out. The Atlanta school system in the 20s and 30s basically gave teachers paper script, which was absolutely worthless. And if retailers accepted it, they wanted a premium on it, or they wouldn't give change back on it, or they any number of complicated things that they did. And what did Riches do? They said, you know what? Not only are we going to take this script, we'll just cash it as a check. So Riches opened up basically a bank on the top floor of their building and cashed at face value the script from city. So they basically bankrolled the teachers during that time. And it goes on and on. 1943, they started the Rich Foundation. And there's really, I think you could argue, not a single institution, at least Atlanta old school institution in this city, that you couldn't say Riches didn't have a help in helping. A WABE, which you see on the left of your screen, that W is the call letter for east of the Mississippi, and ABE is the Atlanta Board of Education. And Riches gifted that radio station to the city of Atlanta. It actually started as an in-store radio station for Riches, where they walked around with a microphone in the store. And eventually, for tax purposes and other things, they gave it away to the city of Atlanta. The Riches Computer School, the Gazetta School of Business at Emory was originally the Riches School of Business. The building's still there. They gave to Riches. They helped bring Emory to Atlanta. And then of course, you see the phoenix from the ashes, the statue, which is down in Woodruff Park. That was a gift from the foundation for the 100th centennial celebration of Riches in 1967, was put up in 1969, and has subsequently been moved to Woodruff. And it's sort of a de facto symbol of the city of Atlanta now. So you can go on and on. It goes on. I mean, there's a list. Morehouse, Spelman, NAACP, Riches gave to all of these institutions, and continued through what Tom is president of, was, they did a lot. They did, and they still do. You still do, Tom. Give lots of money. And what's amazing to me is that money from the foundation is pre-19, and correct me if I'm wrong, Tom, but it's pre-1976 merger, or when Riches got bought by Federated. That money was all generated pre that time. So to me, that's amazing.
Yeah, the foundation is funded exclusively by the customers. A profit of the store was allocated every year to go into the foundation. So if you shopped at Riches, you have a hand in the gifts from the foundation. That's where the money came from. So I think we've got, we ought to go to the Q&A, Jeremy. Jeff, thank you very much for those outstanding and detailed answers. They're very interesting. And Jeremy, let me ask you to take the Q&A role here.
Thank you so much, Tom and Jeff. You are a dynamic duo and so knowledgeable. We've gotten a lot of feedback from the audience. This has been a very engaging talk. Just to kind of follow up, piggyback on what you are talking about, the Rich Foundation, someone was asking about the funding of the Rich Foundation, and also about the Rich family of members. We mentioned Rosalind, who's on the call, and are there still members in Atlanta? Are they still involved with the Rich Foundation? What are some of the causes that the Rich Foundation supports today? Those are some of the questions that we've gotten in, just to carry on that conversation we were just having.
That's all. Very briefly, the two primary issues of the foundation are education and social justice. They used to do a lot in medical research. Frankly, that's been taken over now by other much larger foundations, which you can see there's some enormous foundations that benefit our city, from Marcus and Blank and Gorzetta and Zeist and any number of just very successful. But education is still important. Basically, the trustees feel that education is the key to a better life. And so they do that, and that the key to good education is reading. So they started with early learning and go all the way through college in Atlanta. That's just a snapshot response to the question.
Jeff, do you want to comment about the Rich family, and are they still in Atlanta, or in the area? Are they still active in the community?
Yes, and yes, and yes. They're, here, they're elsewhere as well. Some have moved away, but they are involved and active still. And so yes, they're still around and still involved.
Great.
Short answer. I'm not trying to be evasive. I don't, all of their things. I'm not aware of all of their activities, but yes, and I've gotten to know quite a few of them over the years, and very wonderful.
This next question is something I come across quite a bit in my work at the archives. Is people have so much memorabilia related to Riches because it was such a stalwart in the city, and it was synonymous with the city. It has that nostalgia. Actually, someone just contacted me recently with a catalog from the 1800s, late 1800s, asking how to preserve it and make it accessible. Can you talk a little bit about this nostalgia and what people should do with their memorabilia from Riches that they have in their basements, closets, and attics?
Send it to me or the Breman. I have a ton. I was joking before I got on that, I have quite a collection, and a lot of it I don't remember ordering because I would take an Ambien at night and then forget that I ordered something and show up at work, and I'd be like, oh gosh, what am I going to do with that? I have more hat boxes than I know what to do with. I also go antiquing and junking quite a bit on the weekends, and just about have to buy anything Riches that I can. And I've found some unique pieces. I think it's different for every individual. I think people are drawn to different things. You can get stuff at an antique store for $4, or you can get into a bidding war on eBay over some Rich's stuff, and it can get quite expensive. There's a lot out there. There's, you know, some of the bigger items. I always say if I find a cash register with Rich's on it, I'm going to have to buy it. I don't know what I would do with it. But there's all kind of stuff out there. And some of it is highly collectible. Some of it is not, and it depends upon the time period too. Obviously, if you find stuff with M. Rich and Bro or M. Rich and Bros, or any of the early stuff, that's much more rare to come by, like the catalog that you mentioned, just to have that scanned and put online so that you can look through that. Because I mean, Rich's had, like Sears and Roebuck, Rich's had a catalog and they mailed it to people all across the South, and you could order from that and order from Rich's. So it would be amazing to see what they sold, but also the prices too. You know, and Rich's was unique. Department stores in general were unique because they sort of introduced thought that we can make your underwear cheaper than you can make it, which was the truth. Like, to go out, buy the fabric, come home and make it, cut it out and all that. And Rich's, some of their first ads were like, yeah, we got your undergarments. We can do that for you a whole lot cheaper than you can do it. And so those kind of things, but it's fascinating.
Tom, I know you've come across a lot of memorabilia too. Can you share some stories or anecdotes about that? I'm sure the foundation has some memorabilia, and, you know, I've been offered things over the years.
Yes, the foundation has a lot of things because that is the last standing corporation that had with the Rich's name on it. And we've got a softball jersey that the employees wore in the 40s, maybe in the 30s. We have a device that expands hats. We have the original the medallion that was produced for the 1942 75th anniversary. We have the original model that was created by the artist, and that really, they had those models. They're the size of 3 feet across, or medallion that was eventually produced by Medallic Arts of about a 2.5 inch of metal. We have that, and we do have an old credit card that goes back to M. Rich and Bro. We tried to buy a new one that we saw online, and it got so expensive that I realized it's out of our league. We shouldn't be spending any foundation money on that, things like that. But yes, we have quite a bit, and we still we keep a lot of records and photographs, and we have a considerable file of things that have just come in over the foundation is, of course, over 75 years old. So there's a lot there.
We're coming up on the end of our time, and I want to, there's questions about the decentralization and the sale of Rich's to Federated and being kind of phased out. So in the last few minutes, could you share just kind of that history, and then what you think the legacy of Rich's department store is and its role in Atlanta?
Two of the things I get the most frustrated with in my experience with Rich's is all the malarkey about Rich's is in financial trouble and that's why they sold to Federated in 1976. That's not true. And that's out there ad nauseum in places. And it's, and the other thing that drives me nuts is that people that hate on Macy's for absorbing Rich's, it isn't Macy's fault. The family sold the Rich's to Federated in 1976. Dick Rich had it started in the 50s and early 60s. They started to do this suburbanization of the store. I mentioned Knoxville before that. They'd actually had a store down at Fort Benning during World War II. But Dick sort of, I think, reluctantly expanded. I don't think he wanted to. Then you get up to 20 plus department stores over the course of its time. But Dick Rich died in 1975, and after his death, it wasn't there. I don't think there were other people to come in and take the store over like Dick ran it, truthfully. And that's not a knock towards anybody else. I just think that it had morphed and changed. And so Federated came along, and Rich's family, and what people also don't realize is that Rich's has had a board of directors since 1924. So while it was family run, they had to answer to a board of directors. So it wasn't like they solely had complete say in everything that was going, you know what I'm saying? Like there was things they had to work through. But they sold in 1976, became a department, one of 19 departments of Federated. And you get into the Macy's merger and all that. Federated buys Macy's out of bankruptcy. Macy's name is synonymous with department stores in this country. Let's face it, Miracle on 34th Street, it's just PR is what it is, and marketing. And a lot of native Atlantans have moved away. There's a lot of New Yorkers in Atlanta, things of that nature. So when you're running a huge company, you go with the namesake that's most well known. And that was Macy's, and it's happened across the country. And so they phased out. And what people don't realize, in 2007, Federated changed their name to Macy's Inc. So Macy's Inc. was originally Federated, which started off as a federation of department stores working together to have buying power and all that kind of thing. So that's sort of the very short history. That's the part not many people like to talk about. I mean, things changed, time changes. So as far as legacy for Riches, without a doubt, its cultural impact on the city. Without a doubt, looking at its totality of its history, warts and all, phenomenal institution. So there is, it is to this day still an institution. It is the holy grail in Atlanta of what an institution can be culturally. And I think that people miss that. And I think people too miss that sense of community. I mean, again, it was pre-internet, a lot of this stuff, the golden heyday, and it was a place where people could meet and could converse. It was, like I said in the beginning of my book, it was the cultural temple of Atlanta. And I think it really was that. I think, and for us to be talking about a department store chain that has ceased to exist since 2005, fantastic. And look, whether Macy's name is on the great tree or not, it's Rich's tree. It was Rich's history, the pink pig. So Rich's will always be remembered in that way too. So I think it's all of that. But it's unbelievable that I've, 80 something talks on this. It's nuts.
I just think Jeff told the story very well, and the book is a great read. I read it through a second time, obviously in preparation for this, and it's still a fascinating story. So Jeff, thank you very much for your time.
You're welcome. It makes for great firewood.
Well, thank you both, Tom and Jeff.
Yeah.
Go, please go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, we had to condense all of this in an hour. I've touched on things. There are many backstories and lots of things I left out. You can get into the weeds on this. I'm happy to do that. People, you can reach me on my Facebook page. I'm happy to answer personal questions as well. That's the name of the book as well. So you can do that as well. But thank you, Jeremy and Tom and everybody. I really appreciate it.
There's some great Facebook pages dedicated to Riches where you can get into all sorts of fun discussions and share memorabilia. Thank you so much to both you, Tom and Jeff, for sharing your experiences, your knowledge, vast knowledge of the topic. And I hope that you all can join us again next week as we discuss the old Jewish neighborhoods of Atlanta with Dr. Marnie Davis and Dan Masley, who have worked on some really neat mapping projects that they're going to share with us. Until then, stay safe and we'll see you next week. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.